interactive UI, and we're going to make a main menu scene that kind of looks like this and maybe more advanced. So we've got these buttons, we've got this, and start game, and it's all nice and cool. Before we begin, does anyone have any questions about Godot? Or is it? Okay. So then we can begin. So we have our little example here. This looks slightly different than it has in the past, but we want to make a main menu. And so to do that, we just use, that's not what I wanted. We just use the control nodes that we have been using for UI, and we're going to be making a new scene with them. So you can actually set the root node of like a main menu scene as control, because you're only really going to be using control nodes here. So you can just make it control. You can also do a canvas layer here as the root node. That doesn't really matter. Something you also probably want to do is make this control fill up the whole viewport. And to do that, like I think we did last time, you set the anchors of the right and bottom to 1, and you set the margin of the right and bottom to 0. So the effect of that is basically that you're saying we want to specify the right side of this box in terms of the right side of the screen. So if this right anchor is 1, that means all the way to the right in the x direction. If it was, say, 0.5, that would mean half of the screen in the x direction. Then we can re-specify the margin to 0, and that means the right side of this box is 0 pixels away from the middle of the screen, if that makes sense. Same thing with the bottom, 0.5, 0. And if we wanted to lower the top and left, we would say we want to specify the top in terms of 1/4 of the screen, and the top as 1/4 of the screen, and just keep setting margin to 0. And so yeah, we have that all specified. So in effect, just setting the top and left to 0 and the bottom and right to 1 allows you to fill up the whole screen. You can also do that with layout. You can just click the control node that you want and click layout full rect, and that's going to do basically that same thing. There are also other shortcuts here, like center left, will position it, left wide will do all sorts of stuff. Because this doesn't have any content, it's just going to kind of squish it against anything that you place here. But yeah, we want full rect. So now we have our control. We probably want a background, and a good placeholder, at least, for backgrounds is the color rect. You can do the same thing with this color rect, is just make it full rect, and then just specify the color. You can do black, whatever. If you wanted to, you could also make this an image. So we can go through and make this a texture rect. So this is going to load any sort of sprite. Say we wanted a Godot icon. We can make this full rect and expand, and that's going to make the texture the background. So we want to, probably the first thing we want on our title screen is a title. So that's just a simple label. So let's just say name of game right there. And let's put it, let's just say here. So if we go through and save this as our main menu scene, assists, then it's going to pop up like here and do that. So, for the purpose of argument, I'm going to make my game resizable. And I think viewport's gonna work for me. So now, no, that's not exactly what I wanted. I'm gonna make that disabled. So here's something. Our viewport is specified here, but if we launch our game now, then our little name of game is in the top left corner. So this isn't something you have to really think about when you're doing pixel art games, but a lot of games that have that want to support multiple resolutions and multiple aspect ratios. So, you know, most AAA games that want to be resizable and so on. When you actually do that operation, when you make the screen bigger, it makes the viewport bigger as well. And so our color rect is specified in terms of the whole screen, but our label is just specified in terms of position. So it's got a position, we can move it around. And so when we actually manipulate the viewport dynamically, it stays there, and it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't scale or anything like that. So we need a way to make it so that our main menu looks like we want it to at any resolution. So the way to do that, or I guess the easiest way to do that, there's a lot of ways to do that, but one of the easiest ways is to use a container. So there's a subtype of control nodes called container, and these will basically help you to order and arrange things that will support being resized and so on. So what I'm going to do is, because I want my title to be in the center, is I'm going to use a center container. And I'm going to lock the right to the edge of the screen. And I'm going to say that I want the bottom to be a quarter of the screen. So when we put our label in here, it's going to center it wherever the center of this container is. So we can just go ahead and resize this container, and it's always going to put the label in the center. So now, if we hit play, then the size of our text doesn't change, but at least our title is always going to be in the center. And that's basically what we want. There's a lot of different ways to kind of define this behavior, and I can't really go through all of them here. Sometimes you're going to want to scale the text, sometimes you're going to want to keep the text the same size, so on and so forth. But for now, we're just going to leave it the same size, just centered. Anyone have any questions so far? Okay. So now we have our label, and it can scale. But now we want to have a button that, say, loads a scene. So there is a convenient little control node called button that we can use to make that happen. It's in base button, button. So we just create a button, and it creates this little button thing that we can use. So let's just put that down here. And like a lot of control nodes, you can specify text inside of it. So we want our button to say load or start game. So let's do a similar thing to our title, in that let's make a center container to contain it. say we want this to be on the bottom quarter of the screen centered. So we make our bottom to 1, right to 1, top to 0.5. And then we go ahead and 0 all of these out. So now if we put our button inside of this center container, it's going to be centered on the bottom quarter of the screen. And we can go through and resize and make sure that that's going to happen. So yeah, our start game is always going to be right there. So now we have our button. We need to define some behavior for when it is clicked. Because right now, if you just click it, it doesn't do anything. So there are multiple ways to get this behavior, but the one that Godot kind of supports the best is to use signals. So we've used signals before, hopefully, and basically they're just functions that will run when some condition is satisfied. So for a button, it has these signals for button up, button down, and pressed. You can use these for different things that you want. Say you wanted to do something only when the player lets go of the button, then that would be the button up. The simplest one to use is to just use pressed, so we can just connect that one. We also need a script to attach this to. And there's multiple ways of doing this in something like a main menu. A lot of times you'll have a script attached to the root node, and the root node will act like a kind of controller. So you'll have the root node kind of controlling all the things. It knows where the buttons are, and it'll run the code itself. Alternatively, you can have each button have its own script. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing here, because we don't have a lot of things that we want to change or modify in the scene, in the main menu scene itself. So we're just going to add a script to the button. Go to script. Scripts, button. We want this. So load scene button. Typically, you will want to have a subfolder for all of your UI elements, just for organizational purposes. And create that. So first, we need to connect our pressed signal to our script, and we just go to the node properties, go to pressed, and just connect it to the button. If we were using a single script for the whole scene, we would connect it to the control node, but the script we want to attach it to is attached to the button. So we'll just do that. You can rename this, but I'm not going to. And we can just connect. So this is going to run, this little function here is going to run whenever the player presses the button. And we can test that with print pressed. So if we run that, then in the terminal down here, every time we press the button, it's going to print out pressed. So we can use that to run the change scene function, which is confusingly get tree dot change scene, or change scene to. We're going to use change scene to, and change scene to takes something called a packed scene. I believe we've gone through this before, so we need our packed scene. And how I'm going to do this is I'm going to do export of type packed scene var scene to change to. So what this does is this lets me set the scene that I want to change to in the editor. So this variable declaration will appear right here, so scene to change to, if we expand that a little bit. And we load whatever scene, I guess test scene, and so now we have access to this scene to change to variable. And this is my favorite way to load scenes. An alternative way to load scenes is to have just a string variable scene path, and you can actually drag the scene to get a scene path into the script, and then you can load the scene based on that. But I like to use this export packed scene because I can load it from the editor. So once we have that, we can just change scene to change to. That is a mouthful. And we can press play, start, and it's going to change to our scene. It's a little zoomed out right now because I mess with the window properties, but that is how we do that. So now let's say we wanted to change how this main menu would. But first, any questions? You good? Okay. So let's say we wanted to change how this scene looks. The default Godot button visuals are a little bit bland, and the default text you can't even change the size of the default text. So what we want to do is add some override themes to our objects. So first we're going to need some sort of font. You can actually use any kind of font on your computer. I just looked up a pixel art font that I'm going to use, and I'm actually going to change the window properties back to 2D. So once you have this font, you just drag the TTF into the assets or wherever you're keeping your Godot project. And what you can do is you can go into custom fonts on any control node that has text. So this button also has custom fonts. This label has custom fonts. Basically anything with text is going to have a custom font that you can use. So we just click new dynamic font. We don't actually load anything here. We have to have a new dynamic font. And inside the font, we load the font data as the TTF. So our font is .e.ttf. And you also have to set the size. So let's set it to say 32. And that's going to display up there. And we can do the same thing with this button. Custom font, new dynamic font, load the font data as .e.ttf, and set the size to say 16 for the button. So now if we go ahead and play, nice stylized fonts. You can also do other things for the font, like change the font color somewhere. I don't remember how to do that correctly. Custom colors, yeah, font color. So you can change it to white or red. I'll do red, that's fine. So this is under custom fonts that are custom colors. And then font color here will be white. And yeah. That's interesting.
Maybe tune it up.
It sounds like a fan is spinning out.
Yeah. I'll just do that. And it's going faster and faster too.
Huh.
That's good start.
Anyway, so now we have these nice colorful fonts, and we can start the game. But we also want to redefine how this button looks. And the button theme is defined by these custom styles here under the button. So we have hover, press, focus, disabled, and normal. So all of these take a kind of style box. So if you don't want any theme here for the button, you can just say style box empty, and that'll get rid of it. But we're going to be using the style box flat, which just allows us to define a custom box that we can use for the button. So say we wanted the background color to be green. Let's say a dark green. And it's going to not update because 3.0 is terrible. But you basically define that for each of these states. So the hover is going to be when the mouse hovers over it. So this can be something like a lighter green, like that. So now if we test it when we mouse over, it's going to be green. There is also the pressed state, and this is going to be when the player's actually pressing down currently. So we can make this a darker green. So maybe you just do like a real dark green. So now that's kind of harder to see, but that works. And then there's also that selected state. So if you select it like that, then it's going to have this little blue border around it, and that's the focus theme. So we can use style box here as well, and if we set the background color to transparent by setting the alpha to 0, and we give it a border, let's say the border is 1 by 1 by 1 by 1. So this is going to have a border around it. You can specify the border is yellow. Let's say this is an ugly main menu, but that's fine. We can go ahead and do that, and when we press it, it's going to have this little yellow thing around it. You can also make this larger than the box itself. So say we wanted to expand it by 2 pixels in every direction, then it's going to be 2 pixels larger than the box. So it's going to kind of give it a outlined look. And you can also give it rounded corners with this corner radius. And so now we have a nice little button. You can also define full themes. I haven't really played with that, but you can basically have a theme that is throughout the entire game for all of the UI, and you can basically just have that as the default and not have to mess with it each time. But for a lot of games, it's just, you know, not really worth it to go through that trouble and to just do it per label or per button or whatever. So now we have a nice looking little main menu that drops us into the world. So any questions? That is most of what I had. I can also probably walk through some more of the container methods. So say we wanted to have multiple buttons. So say we wanted to have a quit game button. We want it to be quit. And we can move the center container down. So if we wanted to have this button, we would have to kind of manually place this every time, and that kind of gets ugly when we want to be able to accommodate multiple resolutions and everything. So there is a nice container for this very thing called the box container. And so you can have a vertical or horizontal box container. We're going to do vertical because we want vertical elements. So what this vertical box container can do is, so let's just position this at the bottom half of the screen, or maybe bottom quarter of the screen or whatever. Let's stretch it out. No. So what this VBox container does is if we put our center containers inside of them, then they're going to arrange them such that they are aligned. So we can keep adding these center containers, and it will automatically add or automatically position all of them so that they are as centers as they can be. So if we wanted to space these out a little bit more, we could have a spacer. So in the controls, separator, vertical separator, put that in between these two, then we can have a little bit of separation. So we can say have this be 5 pixels or whatever, and that's just going to space out the elements of our HBox. VBox, I mean. Another thing to do is we can play with the size flags. So this is something that gets a little advanced for UI, but basically you can specify how you want the containers to fill other containers. So these size flags will basically let us say we want to expand to fit as much space as we can. So in, say, the vertical, we can say expand on both of these. And so now they're going to be as spaced out as possible while maintaining their center. And if we keep adding more buttons, then it's going to do the same operation for every button that we add. And so we can make a list of options like that. So if we wanted this quick game to actually function, we would just have a new script. No, I want a new script. Clear the script, new script. Go to scripts. Quickgame.gd is fine. Put that in the menu. And do the same thing with the signal. So we connect the signal to the quick game button. And so we can get tree. I believe it's, let's get tree. Get tree.quit. So now this button, when pressed, will close the window. Perfect. Is there any other things y'all would be interested as far as UI goes with Godot or anything. Kind of underplanned for this workshop. Let's see. I mean, yeah, that's basically it. If you kind of get a grasp on how anchors work, you can basically use any of Godot's control nodes. Just kind of read up on how they work. You can position them however you want, from the left side of the screen, the right side, or whatever. Other things about control nodes is it is very easy to be able to click on them. So buttons have their own pressed signals and everything, but every control node has a signal for mouse entered and mouse exited. And so what these can be used for is you can connect them to whatever script you want, probably whatever game controller you have, and you can know whenever the player has clicked on any part of the screen. So if you wanted to specify your own kind of button without using the button node itself, you could just have a control node of a specific size, and if they click in that area, then you can get that, you can know that with those mouse entered and mouse exited signals. For Node 2Ds, if you wanted to do that with like regular sprites or something, you would have to use ray casting. You would have to cast a ray from the camera, I believe, or just, you know, do some math to get the rect on the screen. So that's pretty nice for